The clock on the garage wall showed 9:15 p.m. when Derek finally wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled the air around him as he looked at the last car he'd worked on that day. It was a fancy BMW that belonged to Mrs. Johnson, an elderly lady who lived across town. Her grandson had recommended Derek's garage after Derek had fixed his truck for half the price other shops wanted. Derek had been running Thompson's Auto Repair for almost 10 years now. What started as a small dream had grown into something he was truly proud of. The garage wasn't the biggest or fanciest in town, but people knew they could trust Derek to do good work at fair prices. Word had spread slowly but surely through the community. Customers would tell their friends, and those friends would tell their families. The garage sat on the edge of Riverside, a quiet town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Derek had chosen this location because the rent was cheaper than downtown and he could afford to offer better prices to his customers. Over the years, he'd built relationships with people from all walks of life. There was Tom, the construction worker who brought in his beat-up pickup truck every few months. There was Jennifer, the teacher who drove a small Honda that Derek had kept running for over 5 years. And there was Mr. Rodriguez, the retired firefighter who trusted Derek with his prized 1967 Mustang. Derek took pride in treating every car like it was his own. He didn't just fix problems. He explained them to his customers in simple terms they could understand. He never tried to sell unnecessary repairs or overcharge for parts. His philosophy was simple: treat people right, and they'll keep coming back. It had worked well for him so far, but tonight felt different. Derek was tired, more tired than usual. He'd been working since 6 a.m., taking on extra jobs to save money for the new equipment he wanted to buy. His goal was to expand the garage and maybe hire an assistant. The work was piling up, which was a good problem to have, but it meant longer days and less time for himself. As Derek gathered his tools and locked up the more expensive equipment, he thought about the plans he had for the weekend. His sister Lisa was bringing her kids over for dinner on Sunday, and he was looking forward to seeing them. Her youngest, Tommy, always asked a million questions about cars and how engines worked. Derek loved sharing his knowledge with the curious 8-year-old. The last thing Derek did every night was check his own car, a reliable but aging Ford sedan that had seen better days. He'd been meaning to replace it, but every time he saved enough money, something came up. Either the garage needed a new tool, or a customer couldn't pay their full bill right away, and Derek would work out a payment plan rather than leave someone stranded without transportation. Tonight, when Derek turned the key in his car's ignition, nothing happened, not even a click. He tried again, pumping the gas pedal a few times, but the engine remained silent. Derek popped the hood and examined the engine with his flashlight. The battery connections looked clean, and there was no obvious problem he could spot in the dark. Great, Derek muttered to himself. The mechanic's car breaks down at his own shop. He could have called his sister to pick him up, but Lisa lived 20 miles away and had to work early the next morning. His friend Jake lived closer, but Derek knew Jake's wife had just had a baby, and they were probably trying to get some sleep. Derek looked at his phone and considered calling a taxi, but the local cab company charged extra for late-night calls, and Derek was trying to save every dollar he could. The walk home wasn't that far, about 2 miles through some residential neighborhoods and then to his small apartment complex. Derek had walked it a few times before when his car was in the shop getting parts. It was a safe area, quiet and well lit, with sidewalks most of the way. He'd never had any problems. Derek grabbed his small toolbox from the garage. He always carried it with him, even when walking, because you never knew when someone might need help with their car. Just last month, he'd helped a stranded motorist on Main Street when their alternator died. The toolbox contained basic tools, some wrenches, screwdrivers, jumper cables, and a few other essentials. Before leaving, Derek double-checked that the garage was secure. He activated the alarm system and tested the door locks twice. This business was his life's work, and he protected it carefully. The insurance company had given him a discount for having such good security measures in place. The night air was cool and refreshing after spending the day in the stuffy garage. Derek started walking at a comfortable pace, enjoying the quiet of the evening. Street lights illuminated his path, and he could see the warm glow of television screens in the windows of houses he passed. This was a nice neighborhood, filled with well-maintained homes and tidy front yards. As Derek walked, he thought about his day. Mrs. Johnson's BMW had needed a new fuel pump, which he'd installed perfectly. The young couple with the minivan had just needed an oil change and tire rotation. Their toddler had sat in the waiting area, fascinated by the toy cars Derek kept in a box for young customers. Derek remembered being that age and being amazed by anything with wheels and an engine. The path took Derek through Oakwood Heights, one of the nicer residential areas in town. The houses here were larger, with manicured lawns and expensive cars in the driveways. Derek had actually worked on several vehicles from this neighborhood. The owners had found him through recommendations, and despite their wealth, they appreciated his honest approach and fair prices. Derek wasn't bothered by walking through this area. He'd grown up in Riverside and felt comfortable anywhere in town. His father had taught him that respect was something you earned through your actions, not something that depended on where you lived or what you looked like. Derek had always tried to live by that principle. The toolbox wasn't heavy, but Derek shifted it from his right hand to his left as he walked. He was making good time, and figured he'd be home within 30 minutes. Tomorrow, he'd catch a ride, back to the garage with his neighbor Carlos, who worked an early shift at the plant nearby. Carlos had offered rides before when Derek's car was having problems. As Derek continued walking, he noticed a police car driving slowly through the neighborhood. This wasn't unusual. Police regularly patrolled all areas of town, especially in the evening hours. Derek gave a small wave as the car passed, a friendly gesture he'd learned from his father, who always said it was important to show respect for people doing their jobs. But instead of continuing down the street, Derek heard the police car slow down behind him. He glanced back and saw the red and blue lights starting to flash. Derek stopped walking and turned around, confused about what might be happening. Maybe there was an emergency nearby, or perhaps the officer needed directions. Derek stood on the sidewalk, holding his toolbox and waiting to see what the officer wanted. He checked his watch. It was 9:45 p.m. He wondered if there had been a break-in in the area or if someone had reported suspicious activity. Derek was always willing to help law enforcement if they needed information about anything he might have seen. The police car pulled up next to the curb, and Derek could see the silhouette of the officer inside. The engine idled as the officer seemed to be looking at Derek and perhaps running some kind of check on his radio. Derek remained calm and patient, knowing that police had important jobs to do and sometimes needed to investigate things that seemed routine to regular citizens. Derek's mind wandered briefly to his plans for tomorrow. He needed to order parts for 3 different vehicles, call Mrs. Patterson about her car that would be ready for pickup, and hopefully figure out what was wrong with his own car. It had been a good day business-wise, with several satisfied customers and enough work scheduled for the rest of the week to keep him busy. The officer's door opened, and Derek prepared to be helpful with whatever information or assistance might be needed. He had no idea that this simple walk home was about to change everything, and that the next few minutes would test everything he believed about fairness, respect, and justice in his community. Little did Derek know that this encounter would not only challenge his faith in the system, but also reveal connections and truths that would surprise everyone involved, including himself. Officer Bradley Wells stepped out of his patrol car with the confidence of a man who believed he knew exactly what he was looking at. At 42 years old, Wells had been wearing the badge for 15 years, but his career had been marked more by controversy than commendation. His fellow officers often whispered about his quick temper and the complaints that seemed to follow him like shadows. Tonight, those same instincts that had gotten him into trouble before were about to surface again. Wells adjusted his duty belt and approached Derek with purposeful steps. His hand rested casually on his radio, a habit he developed over the years to show authority. The streetlight cast long shadows between the two men as Wells stopped about 10 feet away from Derek, studying him with suspicious eyes. "Hold it right there," Wells commanded, his voice carrying the tone of someone used to being obeyed without question. "What are you doing walking around this neighborhood this time of night?" Derek was taken aback by the aggressive tone but remained calm. He'd dealt with difficult customers before and knew that staying composed was always the best approach. "Good evening, officer. I'm just walking home from work. My car broke down at my shop, so I decided to walk." Wells scanned Derek from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the toolbox. "Your shop? What kind of shop?" The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable, as if Derek's explanation was automatically suspect. "I own Thompson's Auto Repair over on Industrial Drive," Derek replied politely, shifting his weight slightly. The toolbox was getting heavier and his workday had been long. "I've been working late tonight and my car wouldn't start." "Uh-huh," Wells grunted, clearly unconvinced. "So you just decided to take a stroll through one of the nicest neighborhoods in town, with a toolbox?" He stepped closer, his flashlight now trained directly on Derek's face. "You know what I think? I think you're looking for easy targets. Nice houses, expensive cars in the driveways, people who might not lock their doors." Derek felt his heart rate increase, not from fear, but from disbelief. This wasn't how he'd expected a simple police encounter to go. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I can show you my business cards, my identification, anything you need to see that I'm telling the truth." Derek slowly reached into his wallet, making sure to move deliberately so as not to alarm the officer. He pulled out his driver's license, several business cards for his garage, and even a receipt from the auto parts store he'd visited earlier that day. "Here," he said, extending the items toward Wells. "This should clear everything up." But Wells barely glanced at the documentation. Instead, he seemed more interested in Derek's reaction to being questioned. "Anyone can get fake business cards made," he said dismissively. "What I want to know is what's really in that toolbox of yours." "It's just basic tools," Derek explained, his patience beginning to wear thin despite his efforts to stay calm. "Wrenches, screwdrivers, jumper cables, the kind of things any mechanic carries. Officer, I've lived in this town for over 30 years. I went to Riverside High School. I'm a business owner and a taxpayer." Wells seemed to interpret Derek's detailed response as defiance rather than cooperation. "Oh, so now you're giving me attitude?" he said, his voice rising. "I asked you a simple question about what you're doing here, and you're getting all defensive on me." Derek realized that no matter what he said, this officer had already made up his mind about the situation. Still, he tried one more time to de-escalate. "I'm not trying to be defensive, sir. I'm just trying to explain that there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a local business owner walking home from work." "Right," Wells said sarcastically. "And I suppose you just happen to choose the route that takes you through the wealthiest part of town? You expect me to believe that's a coincidence?" The truth was, Derek's route did take him through several different neighborhoods because it was the most direct path home. He'd walked this same route before without incident. But trying to explain geography to someone who'd already decided you were lying seemed pointless. Wells keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need backup at the corner of Oak and Maple. I've got a suspicious person I'm investigating for possible burglary preparation." Derek's eyes widened. "Burglary preparation? Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just walking home." "That's what they all say," Wells replied, now completely convinced he was dealing with a criminal. "Why don't you set that toolbox down nice and easy so I can take a look at what you're really carrying around?" Derek hesitated. He knew his rights, and he knew that without probable cause he wasn't required to consent to a search. But he also knew that asserting those rights might make the situation worse. "Am I being detained?" he asked carefully. This question seemed to anger Wells even more. "Oh, so now you're a lawyer too? You know your rights, huh? That tells me you've been through this before." Wells stepped closer, now clearly treating Derek as a threat rather than a citizen. "Yeah, you're being detained for investigation. Now put the toolbox down." Derek complied, gently placing the toolbox on the sidewalk. He kept his hands visible, and his movements slow and deliberate. "Officer, I understand you're trying to keep the neighborhood safe, and I appreciate that. But you're making a mistake. I'm not a criminal." "Save it for the judge," Wells muttered as he knelt down to examine the toolbox. He opened it and began pulling out tools, examining each one as if looking for evidence of criminal intent. Looks like a real professional kit here, perfect for breaking into cars, forcing windows, maybe cutting alarm wires. Derek watched in amazement as ordinary mechanics' tools were being described as burglars' equipment. Those are legitimate automotive repair tools, he said. You can verify that with any mechanic in town. Wells continued his examination, clearly hoping to find something that would justify his suspicions. When he found Derek's jumper cables, he held them up like evidence. And what's this for? Planning to steal cars that won't start? They're jumper cables, Derek said, his voice showing his growing frustration. They're for helping people whose car batteries have died. I've probably used them to help 50 people over the years. The sound of sirens in the distance indicated that backup was on the way. Derek felt his heart sink as he realized this situation was escalating far beyond what it should have been. Soon, there would be multiple police officers, all of whom would likely trust their colleagues' assessment of the situation. Wells seemed satisfied that reinforcements were coming. You know what I think happened here? He said, standing up and brushing dust off his knees. I think you were walking through this neighborhood looking for opportunities. Maybe you were planning to come back later. Or maybe you were looking for cars to break into right now. That's completely wrong, Derek said firmly. I own a legitimate business. I have customers who can vouch for me. I have a lease agreement for my garage, tax records, everything you need to verify who I am. Wells laughed humorlessly. Oh, I'm sure you've got all kinds of paperwork. Criminals are pretty smart these days about creating fake identities and cover stories. Derek felt a growing sense of helplessness. Nothing he could say seemed to matter. His explanations were being twisted into evidence of guilt, and his cooperation was being interpreted as suspicious behavior. He'd heard about situations like this, but never imagined he'd find himself in one. 2 more police cars arrived, their red and blue lights painting the quiet residential street in flashing colors. Officers got out of their vehicles and approached. The scene, clearly briefed by Wells over the radio about what they were supposedly dealing with. Derek watched as the officers conferred with Wells, occasionally glancing in his direction. He could see lights coming on in houses nearby as residents became aware of the police activity in their neighborhood. Some people came to their windows or stepped onto their porches to see what was happening. Wells walked back over to Derek with renewed confidence, now that he had backup. Here's what's going to happen, he announced. You're going to come with us for questioning. We're going to sort this out downtown. On what charges? Derek asked, knowing he had done absolutely nothing wrong. We'll start with suspicious behavior and see where it goes from there, Wells replied. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Derek's mind raced. He was about to be arrested for walking home from work. The injustice of it was overwhelming, but he also knew that resisting would only make things worse. As he turned around, he wondered how many other people had found themselves in similar situations, victims of assumptions and prejudices rather than any actual wrongdoing. The handcuffs felt cold against Derek's wrists as Wells secured them. You have the right to remain silent, Wells began, reciting the Miranda rights with practiced efficiency. But Derek wasn't really listening anymore. He was thinking about how he would explain this to his customers, to his sister, to everyone who knew him as an honest, hard-working member of the community. As Derek was led toward the police car, he had no idea that this nightmare was about to take a dramatic turn, and that help was about to arrive from a source that would shock everyone present, especially Officer Wells. The handcuffs had just clicked into place around Derek's wrists when the sound of another vehicle approaching caught everyone's attention. Unlike the aggressive arrival of the backup police units, this car moved with measured authority, a dark sedan that seemed to command respect even before its occupant was visible. Officer Wells paused in his process of loading Derek into the patrol car, glancing over his shoulder at the newcomer with mild annoyance. He was in the middle of what he considered a good arrest, and interruptions from supervisors or other departments weren't welcome. Wells had seen enough crime scenes disrupted by bureaucrats who didn't understand real police work. The sedan pulled to a smooth stop behind the row of patrol cars, and Derek found himself holding his breath without knowing why. Something about the way the other officers straightened their postures and adjusted their uniforms suggested that whoever was in that car carried significant authority. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Police Chief Patricia Rodriguez. Even in the dim streetlight, her presence was unmistakable. At 53 years old, Chief Rodriguez had earned her position through 25 years of dedicated service, starting as a patrol officer and working her way up through detective, sergeant, and lieutenant ranks. She commanded respect not through intimidation but through competence and fairness. Chief Rodriguez surveyed the scene with experienced eyes, taking in the multiple patrol cars, the flashing lights, and the cluster of officers surrounding one handcuffed civilian. Her expression remained neutral, but Derek could see her mind working, processing details and asking silent questions about what had necessitated such a response. "What's the situation here?" Chief Rodriguez asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that came from years of managing complex situations. She wasn't shouting or demanding immediate answers, but every officer present knew they needed to provide a clear and accurate account. Wells stepped forward, confident that his version of events would be supported by his colleagues. "Chief, we've got a suspicious individual who was walking through the Oakwood Heights neighborhood with a toolbox. When questioned about his presence in the area, he became defensive and uncooperative. I've detained him for further investigation." Chief Rodriguez nodded slowly, but her eyes had moved to Derek. Something about his face seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place where she might have seen him before. "And the suspect's name?" she asked. "Derek Thompson," Wells replied, consulting his notepad. "Claims he owns an auto repair shop, but his story doesn't add up. Walking through an expensive neighborhood late at night with burglar tools." The moment Wells said Derek Thompson, Chief Rodriguez's expression changed completely. The professional neutrality vanished, replaced by recognition and then by something that looked very much like anger. "Derek Thompson from Thompson's Auto Repair on Industrial Drive?" she asked, her voice now carrying a sharp edge. Wells sensed something shifting but pressed on with his explanation. "Yeah, that's what he claims. Says he was walking home from work, but who walks 2 miles through residential neighborhoods carrying a toolbox? It's obviously a cover story." Chief Rodriguez stepped closer to Derek, studying his face in the streetlight. When their eyes met, Derek saw something he hadn't expected: familiarity and concern. "Derek?" she said softly. "What in the world is going on here?" Derek tried to speak around the confusion and relief flooding through him. "Chief Rodriguez, my car broke down at the shop and I was walking home. This officer stopped me and—" Derek's voice trailed off as he realized that somehow, impossibly, this situation might actually have a solution. Wells looked back and forth between Derek and the chief, confusion creeping into his confident demeanor. "Chief, do you know this suspect?" Chief Rodriguez turned to face Wells, and her expression was now unmistakably stern. "Suspect? Officer Wells, this is Derek Thompson. He's been maintaining our entire police fleet for the past 3 years." A collective intake of breath came from the other officers present. They all knew about the department's arrangement with a local mechanic who had been doing exceptional work on their vehicles, often at below-market rates. The patrol cars had never run better, and the mechanic had a reputation for being reliable, honest, and incredibly skilled. Wells felt the first stirrings of panic. "Chief, there was no way to know that. He was walking through an expensive neighborhood with tools, and when I questioned him—" "You questioned a respected member of this community who was walking home from work," Chief Rodriguez interrupted. "Derek, are you hurt? Have you been mistreated in any way?" Derek was still, processing the surreal turn of events. "I'm okay, but Chief, I tried to show him my identification, my business cards, everything. He wouldn't look at them. He just assumed I was up to something criminal." Chief Rodriguez turned back to Wells, her anger now clearly visible. "You didn't examine his identification? You didn't verify his story before calling for backup and making an arrest?" Wells stammered. "Chief, in my experience, criminals often have fake documentation. I was following proper procedure for a suspicious person investigation." "Suspicious person?" Chief Rodriguez's voice rose slightly. "Derek Thompson has lived in this community his entire life. He's a business owner, a taxpayer, and someone who has gone out of his way to help this department. What exactly was suspicious about him walking home from work? The other officers were beginning to look uncomfortable, realizing they were witnessing what might be a career-ending mistake by their colleague. Derek could see them exchanging glances and stepping back slightly, as if wanting to distance themselves from Wells's decision-making. Chief Rodriguez moved to Derek and began unlocking his handcuffs personally. "I am so sorry about this, Derek. This is not how our department operates, and it's certainly not how we treat members of our community who have done nothing but support us." As the handcuffs came off, Derek rubbed his wrists and tried to process everything that was happening. "Chief, I have to ask, how do you know me so well? I mean, I know we've met a few times when I've worked on department vehicles, but—" "Chief." Rodriguez paused in her movements, and Derek caught a glimpse of something more personal in her expression. "Derek, there's something you might not know. Something I should have told you before now." The street fell silent except for the hum of the patrol car engines. Even Wells stopped his nervous fidgeting to listen. Chief Rodriguez seemed to be weighing her words carefully, as if what she was about to say would change more than just this immediate situation. "Derek, your father, Michael Thompson, was a detective," she began slowly. "He worked in the department over in Millbrook before you were born. He was my training officer when I was a rookie patrol officer 28 years ago." Derek's eyes widened. He'd grown up knowing his father had been in law enforcement but had few details about his service. His father had died when Derek was only 12, and the family had rarely talked about those painful memories. Chief Rodriguez continued, "Michael was more than just my training officer. He became like a big brother to me. He taught me everything about being a good cop, about treating people with respect, about serving the community rather than just enforcing laws." The revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or a lucky coincidence. There were connections here that ran deeper than anyone had realized. "When Michael died in that car accident," Chief Rodriguez went on, "I lost someone who was like family to me. I kept track of you over the years, watched you grow up and start your business. I've been so proud of what you've accomplished." Wells stood frozen, the magnitude of his error becoming clearer with each word. He hadn't just harassed a random citizen. He'd attacked someone with deep personal connections to his own chief, someone whose family had a history of service to law enforcement. Derek felt emotions welling up that he hadn't experienced in years. Learning about his father's impact on Chief Rodriguez's career, understanding the depth of the connections he'd been unaware of, and realizing that this nightmare might actually lead to something positive. It was overwhelming. "Chief," Derek said quietly, "I had no idea about any of this. My mom never told me much about Dad's work, especially after the accident. She said it was too painful to talk about." Chief Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "Your mother was protecting you and your sister. Losing Michael was devastating for everyone who knew him. But Derek, you should know that you've become the kind of man your father would be incredibly proud of." The other officers had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. What had started as a routine backup call had become a deeply personal moment of discovery and connection. But Chief Rodriguez wasn't finished with her revelations. Derek could see in her expression that there was more to come, and he sensed that everything he thought he knew about his place in this community was about to change even further. Chief Rodriguez looked around at the gathering crowd of officers and neighbors, then back at Derek with an expression that mixed pride, regret, and determination. She had clearly decided that this moment called for complete honesty, not just about Derek's father, but about Derek himself and his impact on the community. "Derek," she continued, "what Officer Wells doesn't understand is that you're not just any mechanic who works on our police cars. You've been doing far more than that, haven't you?" Derek looked puzzled, unsure what she was referring to. "I just try to do good work, Chief. Keep the vehicles running safely." Chief Rodriguez smiled, but it was the kind of smile that suggested she knew things Derek didn't realize she knew. "Derek, do you remember about 6 months ago when Officer Martinez's patrol car broke down during that snowstorm? She was stranded on Highway 9 with a family whose car had slid into a ditch." Derek nodded. "Yeah, I remember getting that call. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and the roads were terrible. You drove out there in your own truck in dangerous conditions and got both vehicles running again. You refused any payment beyond parts cost, saying police officers shouldn't have to pay for emergency repairs. Chief Rodriguez's voice carried genuine admiration. Martinez told me you probably saved that family from hypothermia. Derek shifted uncomfortably, not used to being praised for what he considered normal behavior. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Derek, they wouldn't have. Chief Rodriguez corrected him. And that's just one example. Officer Chen told me about the time you stayed at the station until 3 a.m. working on the SWAT van before a major operation. Again, no charge for the overtime. Wells was listening to this with growing horror, realizing that he had not only arrested an innocent man but someone who was practically a hero to the police department. His face had gone pale and he seemed to be calculating how badly this was going to damage his career. Chief Rodriguez wasn't finished. And then there's what you've been doing in the community that you probably don't think anyone knows about. Derek looked genuinely confused now. Chief, I'm not sure what you mean. Mrs. Henderson on Elm Street, 82 years old, living on Social Security. Her car is 20 years old and breaks down regularly. You've been fixing it for free for the past 2 years, haven't you? Derek looked embarrassed. She's a nice lady. She bakes cookies for everyone in the neighborhood. Her car just needs a little extra attention. And the Wilson family? Single, mother with 3 kids working 2 jobs to make ends meet. You've been maintaining their minivan at cost, sometimes eating the labor charges yourself. By now, some of the neighbors who had come out to see what the commotion was about were nodding in recognition. Derek realized that his quiet acts of kindness hadn't been as invisible as he'd thought. Chief Rodriguez raised her voice slightly so the growing crowd could hear. This is the man Officer Wells decided was a criminal threat to your neighborhood. Derek Thompson, who has probably helped half the families here at one time or another. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman from the house nearest to where they were standing, stepped forward from her front porch. Are you talking about Derek from the auto shop? She called out. That young man is a saint. He fixed my grandson's car when he couldn't afford to pay. Just ask the boy to promise to pay it forward someday. Another neighbor, Mr. Johnson, joined the conversation. Derek's the one who helped me when my wife had that medical emergency last month. Our car died in the driveway and we couldn't get to the hospital. He came over at midnight and got it running so we could make it to the emergency room. Derek was overwhelmed by the outpouring of testimonials. He had no idea so many people knew about his efforts to help when he could. In his mind, he was just being neighborly, the way his parents had raised him to be. Chief Rodriguez continued her revelations. Derek, there's one more thing you should know. I've been working with the city council on a new program, a civilian liaison position that would work with the police department on community outreach and relationship building. Derek listened with growing amazement as she explained. The job would involve exactly what you've been doing naturally, building bridges between law enforcement and the community, helping people understand that we're here to serve and protect, not to harass or intimidate. I've been planning to offer you that position. Wells looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Not only had he arrested someone beloved by the community and personally connected to his chief, but he had potentially sabotaged a major department initiative. Derek was speechless for a moment. Chief, I don't know what to say. I never imagined anything like this. You don't have to give me an answer tonight, Chief Rodriguez said. But Derek, your father spent his career trying to build trust between police and the communities they serve. You've been doing the same thing, just without a badge. She turned to address the gathered neighbors. I want everyone here to know that what happened tonight is not representative of this police department's values or training. Officer Wells acted on assumptions rather than facts, and that is unacceptable. The crowd murmured agreement, but Derek could see that most of their anger was directed at Wells, rather than the police department as a whole. Chief Rodriguez's handling of the situation was clearly earning respect from the community members present. Derek looked at Wells, who was standing apart from the other officers, clearly realizing his career was in serious jeopardy. Despite everything that had happened, Derek felt a moment of sympathy for the man who had put himself in such an impossible position. Chief, Derek said quietly, I know Officer Wells made a mistake tonight, but I don't want this to destroy anyone's life. Maybe this could be a learning experience for everyone. Chief Rodriguez studied Derek with the same expression she might use when evaluating a particularly impressive piece of evidence. "That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from Michael Thompson's son," she said, "always looking for ways to build rather than tear down." But Wells's problems were far from over. Chief Rodriguez had a duty to the community and to the integrity of her department that went beyond personal forgiveness. "Derek, I appreciate your generosity," she said, "but there are procedures that must be followed when an officer violates department policy and potentially violates a citizen's rights." She turned to Wells with the authority of her position fully displayed. "Officer Wells, you will report to my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. You are suspended pending a full investigation of tonight's events." Wells nodded miserably, knowing that his record of complaints and his actions tonight would likely result in termination. Chief Rodriguez then addressed the other officers present. "I want everyone here tonight to write detailed reports about what they observed. This incident will become a case study in our training program about the importance of proper investigation procedures and community relations." Derek realized that this terrible experience might actually lead to positive changes that could prevent other people from going through what he had endured. The thought gave him some comfort, even as he was still processing all the revelations about his father and his own role in the community. As the crowd began to disperse and the extra patrol cars prepared to leave, Derek found himself standing, with Chief Rodriguez under the streetlight where this whole encounter had begun. The toolbox that had been treated as evidence of criminal intent was now just what it had always been: the tools of an honest man trying to make a living and help his neighbors. But Derek sensed that Chief Rodriguez had one more revelation to share, something that would complete the picture of connections and coincidences that had turned this nightmare into something approaching a miracle. 3 weeks after that life-changing night on Oak and Maple Street, Derek found himself sitting in the city council chambers, surrounded by familiar faces and some he'd never seen before. The events that had started with a broken-down car and a prejudiced officer had snowballed into something much larger than anyone could have predicted. Chief Rodriguez sat at the front table presenting her final report on the incident to the city council. Officer Wells had been terminated from the police department after an internal investigation revealed a pattern of complaints and inappropriate conduct spanning several years. The investigation had uncovered 3 other incidents where Wells had stopped citizens based on assumptions rather than evidence, though none had escalated as dramatically as Derek's case. The termination of Officer Wells was necessary to maintain the integrity of our department and the trust of our community, Chief Rodriguez told the council. However, this incident has also highlighted the need for improved training and better community relationships. Derek shifted in his seat as Chief Rodriguez's presentation moved to the positive outcomes that had emerged from that terrible night. The story of his arrest and the revelations that followed had spread throughout the community, but not in the way Derek had feared. Instead of damaging his reputation, the incident had revealed the depth of his contributions to the town and had inspired others to share their own stories of his quiet generosity. The police department had implemented new training protocols based on what had happened. Every officer now attended monthly workshops on implicit bias, proper investigation procedures, and community engagement. Derek had agreed to speak at these sessions, sharing his perspective on how the encounter had felt from a citizen's point of view. "Mr. Thompson has agreed to accept the position of Community Police Liaison," Chief Rodriguez announced to the council. "His role will be to build bridges between law enforcement and the neighborhoods we serve, particularly in situations where trust has been damaged." Derek still felt amazed when he thought about how dramatically his life had changed. The liaison position came with a modest salary, but more importantly, it gave him an official platform to do the kind of community building he'd been doing informally for years. He would split his time between running his auto shop and working with the police department on programs designed to strengthen relationships with citizens. After the council meeting, Derek drove through the same neighborhoods where he'd been arrested just 3 weeks earlier. Now, instead of walking home with a toolbox, he was heading to his first official community meeting as the new liaison. The meeting was being held at the community center in Oakwood Heights, the same area where Wells had assumed Derek didn't belong. The community center was packed with more people than Derek had expected. He recognized many faces: Customers from his shop, neighbors from various parts of town, police officers, and city officials. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose car Derek had been fixing for free, sat in the front row with a proud smile. The Wilson family, whose minivan Derek had maintained at cost, waved from the middle section. Chief Rodriguez opened the meeting by explaining the new community policing initiatives that had grown out of Derek's experience. "What happened to Derek Thompson could have divided our community," she said. "Instead, it's brought us together and shown us how much work we still need to do." Derek stood to address the crowd, still nervous about public speaking but determined to make the most of this opportunity. "3 weeks ago, I thought I was just a mechanic who fixed cars," he began. "I had no idea that simple acts of kindness were building the kind of community connections that could save me when I needed help most." He looked around the room at the diverse group of faces: young families, senior citizens, business owners, students, police officers, and city officials. "What I learned that night is that we're all more connected than we realize. The elderly lady whose car you fix for free might be the neighbor who calls the police chief when she sees you being treated unfairly. The single mother you help might be the one who stands up in a city council meeting to defend your character." Derek's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But I also learned that not everyone gets the lucky breaks I got. Not everyone has connections to save them when assumptions and prejudices take over. That's why this liaison program is so important." The new program Derek was launching involved several components. Police officers would spend time each month working alongside community members in their regular jobs, helping at the food bank, volunteering at schools, participating in neighborhood cleanups. The goal was to build relationships before problems arose, not after. Derek had also proposed a community car care program, where his shop and other local mechanics would provide basic maintenance training to residents, particularly seniors and single parents who might be vulnerable to being overcharged or taken advantage of. Off-duty police officers would help with the programs, building trust through shared community service. After the meeting, Derek found himself surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or volunteer for the new programs. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had defended him on the night of his arrest, approached with tears in her eyes. "Derek, I want you to know that what happened to you opened my eyes," she said. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years and I never really thought about how someone walking through might be perceived differently depending on what they looked like. I'm ashamed it took something like this for me to understand." Derek appreciated her honesty and her willingness to learn. That was exactly the kind of conversation he hoped the liaison program would encourage, difficult discussions that led to better understanding. As people began to leave, Derek noticed a familiar figure lingering near the back of the room. It was former Officer Wells, looking uncomfortable, but determined to stay until he could speak with Derek privately. Derek approached Wells with caution. They hadn't spoken since the night of the arrest, and Derek wasn't sure what to expect. "Derek," Wells said quietly, "I know I don't have any right to ask for your time, but I wanted to say something." Derek nodded, curious about what the man who had nearly destroyed his evening had to say. "I lost my job because of what I did to you," Wells continued. "At first I was angry about it. I thought I was being made a scapegoat for doing what I believed was proper police work. But over these past weeks I've had a lot of time to think." Wells looked around the nearly empty community center. "I've been talking to a counselor about implicit bias and prejudice. I'm starting to understand how my assumptions and fears affected my judgment. What I did to you was wrong, and I'm sorry." Derek studied Wells's face, looking for signs of sincerity. What he saw was a man who appeared to be genuinely grappling with some difficult truths about himself. "I appreciate you saying that," Derek replied. "What are you planning to do now?" Wells managed a small, sad smile. "I'm working construction for now, trying to support my family. But I'm also volunteering with a program that teaches conflict resolution skills. Maybe I can use what I learned from my mistakes to help other people avoid making the same ones." Derek felt a spark of the same impulse that had led him to help so many others over the years. "There might be a place for that in our community programs," he said carefully. "People who have made mistakes and learned from them sometimes have valuable perspectives to share." Wells looked surprised and hopeful. "You'd be willing to work with me? After what I put you through?" Derek thought about his father, the detective who had trained Chief Rodriguez in the values of community service. He thought about all the small acts of kindness that had built the network of relationships that had ultimately saved him. Most of all, he thought about the kind of community he wanted to help build, one where people could grow and change and find redemption. "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right," Derek said. "If you're serious about this, we can talk about how you might contribute to the programs we're developing." 6 months later, Derek's liaison program had become a model that other cities were studying. Crime rates in the community had dropped, not because of more arrests, but because of stronger relationships between police and residents. Derek's auto shop had grown into a training center where police officers and community members learned side by side. Former Officer Wells had become one of the program's most effective volunteers, sharing his story at police academies and community meetings as an example of how prejudice could destroy careers and damage communities. His willingness to admit his mistakes and work for change had earned him a slow but growing measure of respect. Derek often reflected on how that terrible night had changed not just his own life, but the entire community. Sometimes the most difficult experiences could lead to the most meaningful growth, both for individuals and for the places they called home. As Derek locked up his shop each evening and walked to his car, which now ran perfectly thanks to the new alternator he'd installed, he thought about his father and the legacy of service that had connected their lives across decades. Michael Thompson had served his community by wearing a badge. His son was serving the same values without one, proving that the desire to help others and build bridges could take many forms.